Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be making some mother molds. I'm still on the search for that perfect mother mold material. I'm going to try something a little different today. I'm going to be trying to make a mother mold out of the same casting plastic that I'm going to be doing my casting in. Can I make a mother mold from casting plastic? Have I found a new wonderful material for making mother molds, or is this going to end in disaster? I guess we'll find out soon enough. So let's get started. Today I'm going to be using my son's Master Sword toy as a master for our mold. I'm going to be starting this off like I do any other matrix mold. That means I'm going to be using water-based clay. The mother mold is a hard shell that goes around the silicone mold and helps it keep its shape. In order to keep as much clay off our master as possible, I'm going to wrap it in shrink wrap. Clay is going to act as a silicone substitute while we make our outer shell. So we want to make sure the wrap conforms pretty nicely to our master. As you can see, I'm using a clear piece of plexi to help with cleanup later. Now I'm just adding strips of clay that I cut from a slab, and I'm mashing it around the edges of my master. Basically right now, I'm building the support for the first half of my matrix mold. This will hold up the top half, and it'll create a flange for my mold later on. I'm going to keep this process up until I get all the way around the sword. As you can see, I'm being careful to keep this about halfway up the sword because I want my first half of my mold to end around that point. That way I don't get any undercuts. We have to be able to open and close the mold and be able to get the castings out whenever we're done. Once I'm done with this process, I'll refine the shape so that it looks better and uses less materials. I don't really have a specific tool for this. I usually use the sword from the old video game Demon Sword, but I think I left it at home today. Oh poots. So I ended up using a scraper and an old-fashioned wood saw. Whatever works. Now that I've refined the shape, I'll add some slabs of clay to simulate the silicone and to help me create the shape of my outer mold. I just want to make sure that everywhere there's going to be silicone, there's going to be clay. So I have to cover up the entire top of my sword. As you can see, I'm doing a little refining as I go. I made one of these slabs a little too bumpy and thick, so I trimmed some of that off with my scraper. I have a nice slab cutter at home, but I forgot to bring it. You know what? I bet it's propped up next to my sword. Water really helps you smooth out the surfaces of clay, but also it doesn't hurt to use a scraper. These are some scrapers used to clean out the insides of a pumpkin at Halloween, and I think they work great. I was turned on to these by an art teacher that used to teach ceramics at this school. Thanks, Mr. O. They make tools like this for a professional, and those also work really good at removing large amounts of clay, but in a classroom setting, why not get the cheaper version? It seems to work just as well. Also, you might have noticed that I added a border around the outside edge. I realized that earlier I might have gotten a little too gung-ho and removed too much material. I had to put this little clay shelf back around here so that I would have a seam or a flange for my mold to fit together later, and so that I could put some registration later. Right now I'm rolling out some coils that I can use to build up shelves for registration. I mentioned it earlier, and I will go into more detail once I get to that step in the process. I could have done all this at once, but I wasn't thinking. First of all, recording a process makes it much more complicated. So much more to think about, so much more multitasking going on. And though it's very popular, humans just are not good at multitasking. Sometimes you can let a computer do some of the work for you, or you can do more than one mindless process at a time, but neither one of these things is mindless. Another thing is that I don't make matrix molds too often. As a fine artist, I tend to make one-offs. Once I make something, it's the only one, and it's never made again. Though I intend on changing that, because I do love printmaking, and I kind of feel like I should be doing some three-dimensional versions of printmaking. Whenever you're not doing things like this every day or quite often, you tend to get rusty and you start forgetting steps and things like that and having to go back and correct yourself. While you're watching this, consider ever so gently tickling that like button. I don't know if you've noticed this yet, but I have this little technique where I pinch my fingers together and it helps me make nice even edges. However, I'm also going to use several different loop tools to help me remove material and straighten this mold out. While I refine this mold, I think I'll take this moment to explain my search for mother mold materials. As I stated before, due to the nature of my art, I only make a few matrix molds a year. They are one of my favorite molds to make. They're very useful and they save a lot of money, plus the process itself is a lot of fun. I've made tons of multi-part matrix molds in the past that utilize plaster as the mother mold shell. Many of them were for a series of monoliths that I was doing that I titled Ebenezer. I would sculpt the monoliths in oil-based clay and then create a mother mold and cast them in cement. Then I would leave them behind in places that were really important to me. The mother mold around the outside always seemed to be either too fragile or too heavy. Then I began to make mother molds out of fiberglass resin. While it's not as cheap as plaster, it is still relatively cheap, plus it made a very strong shell. Being that I'm an art teacher now, I can't have those noxious fumes around my students. So the search begins. Right now I'm slicing out and attaching keys to the top of this so that my mold has proper registration inside of its casing. This will keep the mold from slipping around or getting distorted inside the mother mold. If I want to make the silicone mold really secure inside the mother mold, I could put a bevel on this key down toward the bottom. That would trap the silicone inside the shell. However, I want the silicone to be able to come out of the shell with relative ease in case I have trouble getting the casting out. Therefore, I'm going to keep this key straight up and down, and I'll tell you what, it ended up being a good decision. Spoiler alert! The smooth cast Onyx casting resin that I chose to make this mother mold out of ended up being fairly brittle for a mother mold. Maybe because I didn't add fibers, which is a whole other can of worms I'll open later. Now that I have a long key running the length of my mold, I'm gonna add some more that will cross it. Anyway, back to my search for mother mold material. Since I didn't want to fumigate all of my children in my classroom, I decided I gotta have something that is a little less abrasive. For all I know, there are others out there in the same situation as me. And if you're in this same boat, then stick around. I'll waste the time and the money so that you don't have to. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of trial and error. I'm making a playlist so that you can see the outcome of these tests. I'll link it to the end of the video whenever I get it complete. To make these keys, I create a fairly thick slab and then I slice them out using something as a guide. That way they all turn out fairly consistent. If you don't know what a slab is, think of it as a sheet of clay. This is a silicone modeling tool. It's extremely useful and fairly inexpensive. I think I got a whole set of these for under 10 bucks on Amazon. However, you can definitely get some that are more expensive and higher quality. You can use these for almost anything, but I'm primarily using them here to close gaps and to connect my key to my clay. You don't need them, but they sure do make life easier. After refining it a little bit more, it's time to add some fill holes. My idea is that I'm primarily going to be filling this from the top. So I'm going to be using this copper pipe as a placeholder to leave an opening to pour silicone. Now I'm going to make a few more registrations by slicing another slab into strips and then chopping those strips up into angled keys. They were a little thick, so I'm going back and chopping them all in half. After mocking them up, I realized they're all a little long as well, so I need to trim them to fit. You don't have to worry about slip and score because all of this clay is just temporary. It's just to leave room for our silicone and give our shell a shape. Once I'm satisfied, I will go over the whole thing with a damp brush. This gets rid of fingerprints and scratches and all other manner of bumps and flaws. In hindsight, I should have added a few more pour holes. I pretty well knew I needed them, but I got a little overconfident, and we'll see how that turned out later. For our mother mold, we're going to be using Smooth Cast Onyx by Smooth On. It comes in a part A and a part B, which you mix 50-50 or a 1-to-1 ratio. I love this medium for most of my slush castings, which this sword is going to be. But will it make a good mother mold? Now that we've added the accurate amounts, we just want to give it a really good stir, making sure to scrape the sides and the bottom, just like always. This is where the problems start. I just started adding this stuff onto the top of my clay as you normally would, making sure to get good even coverage and trying not to miss any spots by the time I'm finished. Just give that a good turn every so often so it doesn't get stuck. As you can see, I've got some thin spots right in here, so it's going to take more than one layer. Wait about 10-15 minutes between layers so that they're still tacky and they don't separate. To apply this and many other resins, I like to use a silicone basting brush. It works really well and nothing sticks to silicone except for more silicone. So most of the things that I apply peel right off when they're dry. When you're done with this stuff, you can reuse the cup and you can reuse the silicone brush. Looks like everything's going well, but the problem is that the more of this stuff there is, the faster and hotter it dries, which made it extremely difficult to time when to put the fibers in, because I had about 20 or 30 different patches all curing at a different rate. If I'd have paid attention to where I was pouring and poured in order, then it would not have been impossible, but I decided just to skip the headache and forego it. This might have been a little bit to my detriment. I probably could have used those fibers later on. On a smaller mold, it wouldn't have been a problem at all. As you can see, I trimmed the edges to clean them up a little bit, and now I'm trying to remove some of the clay that I don't need. A lot of this was just holding my sword up off the table. Once I get all this excess removed, I can begin working on the shapes for the other half of the matrix mold. It's essentially the same exact process. Some of you might want to watch this to keep from getting confused, and some of you might just enjoy watching people sculpt. But this next step is just a repeat from what I did before. Now I'm just adding more clay on top, where the silicone's going to go on this half of the matrix mold, just like I did on the other half. Again, we want to remember to leave room for our fill hole, that way we have a place to pour. I'm speeding it up this go around because you've already seen me do this on the other side. Once I get all the clay on, I smooth it out and begin to refine it through various methods, whether it's a damp hand or some kind of tool like this. Now I'm using a silicone rib tool. I really like these that are silicone. You can get these pretty cheap online. They're very flexible and they're easy to wash. My hands are pretty easy to wash too, but I only wash them once a week, whether they need it or not. Now we just need to give it a little finesse with the brush. Once that is fairly well refined to my liking, it's time to add keys for registration again. When we talk about registration in art, a lot of times we're just talking about lining things up properly. I could have used silicone modeling tools for this, but I decided to go with those magic fingers. Once I get done laying on all the keys, I will make sure they are all smashed down and attached properly, and I'll refine the shape of them all. I see that I've got a little gap in the corner there, so I'm going to add a little bit of clay and sculpt it in place to fill the void. Now I'm just doing a lot of cosmetic stuff. I have to be really careful because I could spend way too much time just playing around with these shapes and negative spaces, all the while forgetting that the mold itself is not the art. What the stank? My silicone tip came out of my tool. Alright, now that we got both sides done, we need to spray on a little bit of mold release around the first part of the mother mold in order to keep the second half from sticking to it. I'm just going to be very generous. All the ladies love it when you spray on plenty of mold release. Now we're ready for another layer of smooth cast Onyx. Again, I'm putting on multiple layers, waiting about 10 or 15 minutes between each one so that they stick and that they don't become separated later. If they get separated, then they have to go to counseling. It's a whole ordeal. It's best just to avoid it. Once I get all the layers on, I just let it dry. Look at all that crusty goodness. We've got to remove all this. That just won't do. I decided that the fastest and most intelligent way to remove all this gunk and make it look professional was to take it over to the bench sander. Now that we've worked it over really good, we can take it over to the bench and begin to pry it open slowly to make sure we don't break anything this first go around. I'm just using one screwdriver to make room for the other and just repeating this on loop all the way around the entire mold. You have to be careful because not only are you fighting any parts of the mold that might be stuck together, but you're also having to fight all that clay. Almost there, and now I'm scraping out all the clay and putting it in a pile and saving it. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now, I want to wash out both sides of my shell really good and make sure I get all of that clay out of here. Nobody likes a dirty crack. There we go, all clean. Now we want to get all this plastic wrap off of the sword. That way we can make a nice copy of it. Once we get all that off, we put it back in. Make sure the clay is flush halfway up the sword so that there's no undercuts. Then we start adding in a bunch of keys for registration. You can wet a brush handle like I'm doing and kind of twisting it around to create a hole for the silicone to fill. Also mash in a few nuts, that way I can get that hexagonal shape. Seems like a great shape for locking things in place.
Wow, that's nuts.
Now I'm just carving in another long wavy key on the inside. If you remember back to the beginning of the video, I cut off a little too much clay and had to add some back. This is why I had to add it back. I'm just using a ribbon tool to cut that out. And now I'm cleaning it up a little bit. That way our silicone's nice and pretty. We just want to go around the entire thing. Alright, here's where we use all that clay I was saving up. I've got water in a bucket, marking my water line. I drop in my clay, causing my water to go up. Now I'm going to measure how much water has to come out in order to make my water go back down to the line. That shows me how much silicone I need in order to fill my mold.
Displacement.
Now we put the mother mold back together, make sure everything's snapped together nicely, and this is where things were a little wonky. I like to use tactical rubber bands to hold thin molds like this together, but I couldn't find them. Then, I also had some issues trying to pour my silicone. I was just going to fill it through the top, which was a risky move. I think it would have worked, but I got interrupted mid-pour and my silicone started to get a little too thick. So then I had to cut some holes in the side, which didn't go too well because the material is kind of brittle. And so the holes didn't want to come out smooth. I should have put them in from the very beginning. I don't know why I didn't. I guess I was just trying to cut corners and this is what it got me. Either way, it worked. And so now we're washing up everything and cleaning out the second side, clamping it all down. And now we're getting ready to pour that other half of the mold. We're going to use OOM0030 from Smooth On. Comes in an A and a B. And we're going to just pour all that into the predetermined amounts that I measured earlier. I like using 30 for molds because it comes in two different colors. That way you can tell if it's mixed well. The blue and pink make a light violet color whenever it's done right. Now it's time to mix this stuff up. Most of you can probably tell, but this is on fast forward. You definitely would not want to mix this stuff this fast. Look at all those bubbles that are getting whipped into it as is. I like to run a drill like this with a beater stuck in it, and I run it on low like this. And Seems to mix it up really well. We can scrape the sides, scrape the bottom, make sure everything's all mixed up really good, but you don't want to go too fast with it. The faster you go, the more air bubbles get in it. Look at all those bubbles. This is where the mold release becomes really important. After we make sure the two silicone parts aren't going to stick, we just bind it all back together and pour the other half. Now we have a mold of the Master Sword. I wish I'd recorded the second pour because it went a lot better, but you can probably learn more from my mistakes anyway. Now we're going to band this thing up while I wait on a new order of tactical rubber bands to come in. We're also going to use a few zip ties as a stopgap measure. Earlier it was okay if a little bit of the silicone dripped out of the bottom. That would let me know that the mold was getting filled properly. A lot of times you'll deliberately want to put holes in just for that reason. But this time we can't let anything escape. We don't want any of our casting resin on the floor. During my pours, I found out that I have a little bit of a leak at the bottom. When you pour, it's best to have a little bag of clay beside you. That way, if you find a leak, you can just pack it full of clay. I'm doing it preemptively here. Now I'm grabbing a little extra chunk of clay so that I can have a plug for the top after I get done pouring. Now that that's propped up and ready, we can just mix up a little more smooth cast onyx. We're making our castings with the same exact thing we're making our mold from. Again, this is a 1-to-1 ratio. We're just going to mix the same amount of A and B. And I'm going to show you how to do slush casting. We just stir this up really good. Again, this is on fast forward, so you want to make sure you get this really mixed up well. You have about a minute to mix this stuff up, and then you need to pour it in. Once you get your casting resin in, then you want to just pick up the mold and turn it evenly all different ways so that you can make sure the resin gets down in every nook and cranny. I'm putting the clay plug in, and then I'll be ready to turn this thing around rotisserie style. As you can see, I'm turning it slowly, just rotating it around, shifting the balance from the top end of the sword to the bottom end. And now I'm on fast forward so you don't have to watch me do this, but you want to slush this stuff around for a couple of minutes. After I put it down, I like to turn the mold over every couple of minutes, at least for a little while the resin is curing. You guys didn't see this, but I let it set overnight. Now I'm taking all the bands off and I'm preparing to demold it. You can drill holes in the flanges of the mold and bolt it together, but I didn't think this material would handle that. Once my new rubber bands came in, it seemed to do just fine. Now I'm just gently opening it up with a screwdriver, make sure I don't damage the casting in any kind of way. I can't wait to see what's inside. It's like Christmas. Ooh, look at that beauty. Now there's a little bit of flashing at the bottom, but it snaps right off, so you don't have to worry about that. With this mold, I was able to make several really fun projects. I couldn't have been more happy with the outcome. If you want to see how I made all of these projects, I have full videos of each one. Most of the videos have already come out, but the ones that haven't, I'll be uploading soon. I wish I would have recorded more footage of me pouring the silicone so you could see how I got rid of the air bubbles in it, but I'll have to do that in another video.
Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for going through this learning experience with me. And I hope you guys learned something too. I'll do more videos later on how to make proper matrix molds or mother molds. I'll see you all next time.